Hey, everybody. It's Jessica McLeese here, ready to start another exciting webinar. And I am bringing in our guest right now, Dr. Corey Carlisle. And I am going to tell you a little about him as he's getting prepared. Hey there, Corey.
Hey.
So this is one of my friends. We went to some training together, got our certificates for sex therapy at different times, but that's how we met actually, is through some of that supervision and training. So Dr. Corey is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified sex therapist. He's also a Christian minister who coaches men toward discovering their sexual potential. Corey, I'm so excited to have you here today. How are you, my friend?
Doing well. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here. Excited to dive into this conversation. Very important conversation for me.
Absolutely, it is. So guys, welcome. As a reminder, you can use the chat box just like I just did, and you can ask your questions in there. You can also ask them through the Ask a Question function. I know Corey and I both like to be able to interact and engage with you, so we invite you and welcome you to do that. So Corey, give us kind of the bird's eye view, kind of a synopsis of what we're going to go over tonight as we talk about healthy male sexuality.
Yeah, what I would love to do is to help male sexuality tell a better story. And so a lot of times, even this morning, got a podcast in my inbox from Uncovering Intimacy, JD. And so the title of that podcast was How to Help Your Husband Be More Assertive in Bed. So for me, that highlighted the very need of this conversation, one, the topic itself, but also that wives are talking about it. And so what I want to help men do, what I want to help the church and the Christian community do, is tell a better story around male sexuality. Where often we focus on what's wrong. We focus on the pathology of it. And so I want to help to shift that and start focusing on potential. What can it become? Who can we become as sexual men?
I love that. Speak a little to the pathology, because I think that could conjure up a lot of images for people. So what do you mean?
Yeah, so pathology is kind of our clinical language that we talk about disease. And so when something is out of health, unhealthy, that's the pathology aspect of things. And so this is not just with sexuality. Just think about the medical model. And so we live in a medical culture that whether it is diabetes or AIDS or whatever, we name that pathology, we name that disease, and then figure out how to treat that. And what has happened is that we've applied that with sexuality as well, that we've named the problems, named the pathology, the disease. And so for sexuality, that may be addictions, that may be pornography, that may be affairs. We've named all those sins, to use the Christian language, which are all good things. But what has happened is that our focus has been limited on those things, that we've not also introduced to the conversation potential, who it can become. And so we talk about sexual health, for example. Again, great topic to talk about sexual health, but health talks about disease. It talks about pathology and how to restore functioning to what is considered healthy. Where potential talks more about development. Who are we becoming? So it starts to shift the focus of who we're becoming, where potential still includes health. And so as we move toward our sexual potential, that still includes becoming healthy sexual men. But the reverse is not always true. When we just focus on health, we're not necessarily reaching our potential. And so we may not be acting out with pornography, we may not be sleeping around, and all those terms, we may be quote unquote healthy as far as those definitions are concerned, but we've still missed the mark in that we've not reached our potential.
That's so good. So what does that look like for reaching potential? And that's a big question.
It is a big question. And to be honest, this is something that I'm starting to press into, lean into a little more. And so my dissertation started to focus on it. So the title of my dissertation was actually From Pathology to Potential, exploring sacred sexuality for Black Americans. So I focused more on that population for that dissertation. But one of the challenges in having this conversation is because the narrative in our culture and even in the church is so focused on sin management, so focused on the pathology, that even starting to have this conversation to cast this vision, I find it very difficult. But part of what that might look like is living a life that is free from burden. Where we can be creative, where we can be passionate, where we can be generous, where we can offer ourselves in the fullness of our being, where we don't have to worry about, we don't go through the day trying to bounce our eyes. That may still be a good practice, but when I think about Christ and the woman at the well, Was he bouncing his eyes, or was he able to be authentic in that moment? So getting to the point where we can simply be authentic in each moment, alive as sexual beings, and not have to worry about, okay, don't look, don't think about it. Okay, I had one sexual thought. Okay, don't have that extra. We can actually rest in our sexuality. So that's the vision that I want to start casting.
Yeah, man, that's so good, especially that part of how Jesus was able to actually look at the woman at the well, and
Right.
not have to bounce his eyes. He could actually see her as woman. He could see her
Right.
as someone in need of his touch and someone that needed healing. A far cry from what others may have seen her, especially as she told her story and she'd had all these husbands. And so he was able to look at her and say, well, this is who you say you are, and this was your story, but I'm looking at you differently, and I can tell you living water. Beautiful picture. I love it.
And so to gain those eyes to be able to see holistically. And so in that moment, to see her as a full being, which doesn't deny her sexuality, but it doesn't limit it to her just being asexual. It includes everything. So for guys to be able to develop that as well.
I love it. This is a great message, my friend. I'm so glad that you're out there trying to figure out how to show men how to develop this, because I totally agree with you that a lot of times it's spent more as a pathology. And even that article that JD just wrote about how do I get my husband to be more assertive in bed, it kind of shows that piece of how women are needing their men to be fully whole.
Right. Where even in the article itself or in the podcast, it is highlighting that women are asking the question. Wives are asking the question. And so part of the challenge, again, in casting this vision is that when you talk to most guys, it's like, what's the problem? Again, I'm healthy because I'm not sleeping around. I'm not viewing pornography, or at least that often. I'm not doing any of these egregious sexual sins. And so from their perspective, it's like, I'm fine. And so part of the challenge is to help guys realize how much they've been playing it safe and how much that has hurt now their wives, thus their families, and thus their relationship with God. But we don't realize how much we've been playing it safe. That's just been kind of the Kool-Aid we've been drinking, as it were. We're so much in that fog, being conditioned to think in such a way that we've played it safe, and we don't realize the harm that it's been causing.
Yeah, I think that's great. And you talk about that, and you talk a little bit about how playing it safe hurts the relationship with self, others, and God. Can you talk a little bit about each of those areas?
So part of, again, playing it safe is holding back and not living up to our potential. So part of how that would hurt ourselves is that very reason that we missed our potential. We miss who we get to be. And so it's almost a grieve to know that you can take a test, but bomb the test. To know that you can hit a home run, but fail to hit that home run. At some point that grieves, that hurts our own soul. But also with God, because God knows who we were created to be. And so if you think of it like a child, well, your child can do well in school, but he stays in first grade. He never advances to second and third and go into high school and college. He stays in first grade. Well, that would grieve a parent for your child to stay at that same level. And when I think about playing it safe, hurting God, is that sexually we've stayed in the first grade. And this never growing it up. And so it grieves God that he knows there's so much more to us. He created us for so much more, but in playing it safe, we grieve his heart because we're not living up to that potential. And then as it relates to others, kind of like, again, the JD podcast is suggesting that many wives are hurting, where they're not having the fullness of their husbands, I would say in the bedroom, but not even just in the bedroom with the physical act of sex, in the whole relationship. Where I would see not showing up sexually in the bedroom is simply symptomatic of the whole relationship. So there's other areas in which that husband, that male, is playing it safe. And so now they're not able to realize the fullness of their relationship, of their marriage, because of that. And this is the issue that I get into with many of my clients, is that I've had wives, the one who's immediately coming to mind, was angry, and rightfully so, for 25 years of being denied a fulfilling sexual life because her husband was playing it safe. Because he held back, she was mad because she was robbed of that. She was like, legitimately, you're my only sexual partner that I can have. I can't go out and have someone else. And so for you to take that from me for 25 years, I'm mad, and I want to do something different now. And unfortunately, she's not the only one in that position.
Sure. And that's so good, because I've worked with women and I've read articles from women who would all say the same thing, that they feel like their drive is higher, but it's more to that place where you're talking about their husband maybe playing it safe so much that they're not able to have that fulfilling relationship. And it leads to a lot of heartache and fear and concern. And I've heard women give themselves descriptors like, well, I'm fat, or I'm old, and that's why you don't anymore, and I'm ugly.
Right.
And so they take on these really ugly places of self, which speaks to that others. So we hurt others when we're not willing to embrace. From a male perspective, what do you think are some of the things that are standing in the way that are making men want to play it safe?
I think the main one goes back to the story that we tell about male sexuality. And so within the church, we're taught that male sexuality is almost inherently problematic. Or suspect at best. And so it is, watch out, make sure you don't lust, again, bounce your eyes, take cold showers, make sure you don't touch yourself, watch out, danger, 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 danger. So again, it focuses on this is something to be very cautious of. And I think there's some good things there. I think we need to watch out for the danger. But it's like starting the story in Genesis 3 and not in Genesis 1. And so we start with Genesis 3. There's a lot of problems here, and watch out. And we never talk about the original glory of our sexuality. We talk about the sin and how bad it can go wrong, but we never talk about the original glory. Here's what's good. And so guys have been conditioned that way of, okay, I need to watch out. I need to make sure that, again, I bounce my eyes and not have that second thought and do all that. After years of being conditioned that way, it is, okay, I'm playing it safe, where I don't want to impose on you. I don't want to be assertive, because that has been trained and conditioned out of me for years now. So I had one guy who just never approaches his wife, never initiates for sex. And part of what he learned, he was an athlete, was that was how to play it safe. Or if he initiated, then it could come back that, hey, he did something and he was inappropriate. So part of it for him was, I'm never going to initiate. Again, makes sense in that context. But now when he gets married, his wife is like, why don't you ever initiate? It's like, I'm never going to deny you, but also I'm never going to initiate. So again, grieving her heart. And so again, the conditioning that we've had as it relates to how we understand our sexuality, I think plays a large part in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The story that we tell.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned about how men don't want to look like they have a lack of self-control, because that causes an issue. And one of the things I've always hated about what's taught about men's sexuality is men are looked at as having absolutely no self-control. Like, basically, like they're animals. They can't help themselves. And so to be good Christian men, they have to make sure that there are these boundaries and these standards in place. And then it just takes away from what God has in marriage, because they can't fulfill really that desire that they do have and show their wives, no, I want to be with you and I love you and you're alluring and beautiful. All those things that women really want to know from their husband.
Right. And so with all of that conditioning, again, we don't know any better. And so we're left with a couple options. We're left with becoming, like you're saying, becoming the good Christian man means I have to hold that back, because otherwise I'm considered animalistic and the like. And so that's not a good Christian man. And so now essentially we become asexual as Christian men. And so I think about it in the terms of being either a slave or orphan when it comes to our sexuality. So the slave is, I have to do what is right to demonstrate that I'm good, to prove that I'm good, and to try to earn the master's approval. And it feels like I never can do enough. And so as a result, those guys who take on more of that slave mentality, that they have to work to prove their worthiness, then they can come up with a side life, a secret sin. And so I'm going to hide this away over here, because being a good Christian man, that's not appropriate. And so I'm following all the rules out in public. Meanwhile, I'm going to have this side life over here. I've talked with several guys who were going through support meetings and having an affair at the same time. And so they're in the support meeting, and out in the open, yes, I'm doing all the good Christian things that I'm supposed to do. Meanwhile, I'm having this affair. And again, it's a heart issue. And so you have the slave, you also have the orphan. So the orphan feels like he's not worthy. And so because no one has, again, gone back to Genesis 1 that says your sexuality is good and sees that as a blessing, all they know is Genesis 3, your sexuality is bad. And so now they feel shame. And so they're either trying to be the good Christian boy, or again, they're trying to prove their sexual worth by now having a bunch of sexual partners or going into pornography, because now shame is a motivation there. Where in both cases, there's not that core blessing of, no, your sexuality is good. You're good. Be blessed with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So instead of slave or orphan, you need to get to the place where you're son of God. And
Right. Where the Son of God now still recognizes that there's sin in the world. Mm-hmm. And so it's not denying that, but now the Son lives free. The Son lives with responsibility. Yeah. The Son lives to glorify his Father. So he is not going to do anything that disgraces the family name. Mm-hmm. So he's not going to sleep, because that would disgrace the family name, but not living in fear either. There's freedom. And so I think about when I was in college, going back to my parents' house, I didn't ask to go in the fridge. There was freedom there. This is my parents' house. I'm going in and I'm enjoying all that is in their house. Getting to the point where sexuality is that way, where God has given this as a gift. I'm going to enjoy it all. I'm going to enjoy it to the full, where I don't have to hold back in fear. Okay, what is he going to think about this? I want to make sure. No, I'm the Son of God, and this has been his blessing. This has been his gift to me, and I'm going to enjoy it to the full.
Yeah. That's such a good illustration, even just going into the fridge and having the freedom to do that, and then comparing that to being in God's family like that, and not wanting to deny his name. I love that description. Hey, we've already got something in the chat saying, are we going to talk about how to recondition to what is proper? I expect that, yes, that's going to be part of what we talk about. So we're going to get there. I promise you. Hang on. We're going to get there. One of the other things you talk about is just God created us as sexual beings, and that this is a good thing. And you wrote here on the form that I asked you to fill out, as men, we get to be unapologetically sexual. Speak to that a little bit.
So I've had many husbands where, again, I don't want to initiate. I'm sorry if I'm bugging you. My sexuality is an inconvenience. It's a nuisance. And so we're almost apologizing for being sexual, for having a sexual desire, for having even a high sex drive. We get to the point where we apologize, where sometimes I ask guys, how often would you like to make love to your wife? And it's like, well, I don't know, maybe a couple of times a month. I mean, is that your true desire? And so it's like they can't say, they're afraid of saying, yeah, I would like it 3 to 4 times a week. I would like it every day. We feel like we have to apologize of how often we desire sex, or even that we're sexual beings, that I enjoy thinking about sex. I enjoy having sexual thoughts and feelings and engaging in sex. I like talking about our fantasy life. I enjoy these things. We feel like we have to apologize for even being sexual. Yeah. So helping guys where, again, back to the Son of God aspect of it, whereas the son, we don't have to apologize for this. Right. This is part of how God has created us. And so I was talking to a client actually just earlier this week, and it was a novel concept for him that his sex drive was a gift. He just thought it was, again, a nuisance, something to deal with, to make sure he doesn't act out on, but it's not a gift. And so anytime he had sexual urges and desires, again, it came across in more of an apologetic manner. I'm so sorry that I'm having these sexual feelings again. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to not desire as much. I'm trying to hold it back. I'm trying to bounce my eyes and not have these second thoughts. And I'm trying to do all these things. And again, apologizing for the very way that we were created. We were wired to be sexual beings. We were wired to notice beauty, even, which is another concept.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're fearful of even appreciating beauty, that somehow appreciating beauty is now getting into sinful lust. Yeah. It's like, no, sometimes beauty is just beauty. I just enjoy it. And that doesn't mean I want to have sex with you because I appreciate your beauty. It just means that I appreciate your beauty.
Yeah.
The end.
Yeah, it's so good you say that. You know, what's funny is I've talked about that often too, how men a lot of times, not in every marriage, but a lot of times men are the pursuers. And so that active sex drive is really good because it helps the woman to connect on a way where maybe she wouldn't have otherwise. So the husband is able to bring his wife in that way by having that more pursuant desire most of the time, not always, but much of the time. So I did a video on YouTube called "My Husband Gropes Me Too Much," and it's really from like two years ago or maybe more. But I talk about, really what I'm talking about is not my own husband, but a complaint that I hear from women a lot of times, because it does feel like this overarching, you're too sexual, you want to touch me all the time, leave your hands to yourself. Mm-hmm. And so I think wives can be the ones sometimes too to push that away. And in the video, I actually encourage women to, embrace some of that and love on their husband. Yeah. it as a way to connect with him, because that's how he's connecting to you.
Love it.
Actually had a couple of comments, even from a couple of men, saying this is horrible advice. Why would you say this? Which is kind of surprising, because it's not said in a way where I'm inviting abuse, but it almost looks like that's what people are saying. I mean, it's much more supposed to be a playful enjoyment of one another.
I think that goes back to some of our earlier conversation of how we've been conditioned, how we tell the story, where no, this is a bad thing. And so some of the script for many wives and women is to be the gatekeepers, to push back. And that's almost the role that they have adopted is, okay, what I'm supposed to do is tell him that he's groping too much, tell him that he's doing this, and then get with the girlfriends and tell them the same, man, my husband always wants this and always wants that, and he can't keep his hands off me. And that becomes the cultural narrative that we tell. And again, they're conditioned on their side of the street, and husbands are conditioned on their side of the street that at some point, okay, I know I'm groping too much, and no, I want to touch you too much. I'm sorry, I just kind of like it, but now I'm apologizing, and now we're setting up this dynamic where, back to JD's podcast of, how do I help my husband to be more assertive in bed? Well, you've told him to stop groping, you've told him to stop doing this, you've conditioned him to kind of play it safe. And so now he's playing it safe. And that's not just in individual marriages, that's in culture, church at large. We've now conditioned men to play it safe in these ways, to apologize, to hold back. And again, now it's hurting our marriages.
Yeah, that's so true. Even hurting dating, I think, before people get to marriage, because now, I hear women talk about, well, I can't even talk to a guy without him trying to, hit on me, or him trying to think I want to sleep with him. And so we somehow have started these messages even early on, where women are now scared to talk to a man because of those messages that we've been putting out. And then it does really mess things up later when people get married, because then they're like, well, now I want my husband to pursue me and want me, and it seems like he doesn't. And it just messes things up on both sides for us not to have that healthy view of male sexuality.
Yeah, definitely. So from dating to marriage, being able to develop a better script about the approach, where I would love to see in dating where we can have a healthy, honest conversation about sex and sexuality. Here's not only the boundaries, which is where some, rightfully so and appropriately so, set the boundaries premarital as far as sex is concerned, but that's the end of the conversation. They don't talk about who are we as sexual beings. Some of that, and this could be for a whole nother podcast, is that we reduce sexuality down to sex. And so when we have that conversation premaritally, it's just, okay, well, we're saving sex for marriage. End of conversation. And now we got married. It's like, okay, well, we've made a few babies, or what. We've limited sexuality to just sex, and we've not understood the broader sexuality of who we are as sexual embodied beings, as men, as women, masculinity, feminine. We don't have a good concept of that, which causes additional confusion in these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Corey, you talk a little bit about past sins did not negate today's responsibilities, and you call that stewardship. Can you tell us a little what you mean by stewardship and how we apply that to healthy male sexuality?
Yeah. And so the way I kind of think of it is, it's almost like the prodigal son becomes the unfaithful servant. And so some guys who have a wild sexual past, they feel guilty about that. They feel shameful about that. And so they went out doing the prodigal lifestyle, and now they're coming back. But now when they've come back, they fear it's a slippery slope. And so now, to the parable with the talents, it's like they're burying their talent. I went out there and I wasted it. I don't want to waste it anymore. And so now I'm taking on more of that. I'm not the son. I'm now the slave in the father's house. And so now I'm going to bury this because I'm fearful, and I don't know what he's going to do. And so I want to make sure that I don't slip up. I want to make sure that I don't fall anymore. So now I'm burying my talent and not investing, not in growing. And so the stewardship, we're called to be good stewards. We're called to be wise stewards, faithful stewards of what God has given us. And so our sexual past not negate our today's responsibilities, because whatever your sexual past is, okay, you may have not maintained your integrity, sexual purity. That may have not been the case in the past, but today you still have a responsibility to grow your sexuality up. Today, you still have a responsibility to steward your sexuality and grow it into its full potential. Today, you have a responsibility to not play it safe, to bring the fullness of your presence into your marriage, into your relationships, into your walk with God. And so even if your wife is not complaining, this is part of your faithful stewardship before God, that he is giving you this talent, he is giving you the sexuality, and he expects you to grow it up, will hold you accountable if you choose not to.
Yeah, that's really good. So, what are some ways that people can kind of grow that up? Like, do you have some? I know you talked about this is kind of new, and you're working on it, and you're
Hmm.
making sure you're preaching the message where it sounds, where it makes sense to people, and they can embrace it. Have you come up with some of the kind of practical steps that men can start doing to embrace that more healthy sexuality?
Hmm. Yeah, the first thought, kind of like we talked about before, will be casting a vision. And so having a larger vision of our sexuality. And so again, telling a better story. And so to pause, to sit back, what is the story I'm telling about my sexuality? Who
Yeah,
has God created me to be as a sexual being? Maybe weird to think about it this way, but how would Jesus live my sexual life if he was me?
Hmm.
And so God has created me as a sexual being. How do I now start changing my thoughts, my vision as it relates to that? And so is this simply what I can get away with? Is sexuality just about making a few babies and making sure that I don't act out inappropriately? Or is there more? And so the first step is simply having a larger vision. What is the vision for my sexuality? Who has God created me to be as a sexual being? And so that may be listening to podcasts and reading books. Part of it for me, I'm expanding my practice to include coaching. So that I'm walking with men one-on-one through these very things. How do we start? What is your story? And how do we cast a better vision going forward? The other parts of it is developing regular practices. And this is what is still in development. What are those regular practices of retraining our mind? Retraining our hearts, our emotions, so that when we can see beauty, how do we retrain it so that it's not, okay, I see beauty, bounce my eyes, but I see beauty and thank you, God, that's beautiful. How do we retrain our minds to do that? Some of it will be in community as well, where we need each other. And so to be able to bounce thoughts and ideas and feelings with other men. One of my clients is doing this actually very well. He kind of backed into it, realize he has about 4 guys around where they can have honest conversations about sexuality and going beyond simply, did you act out this week? To who do we want to be as sexual men? What does that look like in this new phase of life? We're not in college anymore, so this is not about scoring and all of that. It's like we're all married. How do we grow this into to our potential? And
yeah,
so we will need a group of men around as well.
yeah.
And so yeah, those are some of the initial thoughts as far as how to start moving in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And that casting a vision part is so important. And I think oftentimes it's hard, really and I'm speaking as a woman, so I can only, say so much to how men think. But I think for a lot of men, it's been hard to even figure out what that vision looks like and what it really means. Like you
Yes.
even live my sexuality like Jesus would if he were the
Mm-hmm.
one living it out right now. But yet we know Christ abides in us and we abide in him. So that
Right.
like
Right.
it's a must. It's not even just how do I try to do this, but it's a must to
Mm-hmm.
try to be more and more like him, even in our sexuality. And
Right.
maybe
Right.
as mind blowing as it is that God has control over that piece of us, that's a huge part of our lives that we have to give over to Him,
Right.
and not in that play it safe way, but to make
Mm-hmm. Right.
the helping us, because giving something over to God definitely doesn't just mean not doing certain things. It also means embracing and running forward and doing certain things.
Right. So for some, when we talk about moving toward potential and all this, they see it as downplaying sin.
Hmm.
Actually, I think it's the reverse. We're actually underscoring the seriousness of sin, but expanding the definition. Where sin theologically is missing the mark, and so you have a bullseye. Sin is missing the mark of that bull. Limited sin to affairs and pornography and all that. But sin is also missing the mark in the sense that if we've not become who God has created us to be, we've missed the mark. We've missed the mark of who we're intended to be. Looks like Jessica has got
Um,
knocked out. Maybe
can
some
you not
internet
see
gribbling
me?
here.
Let's see. Can you
Uh,
hear me?
I can hear you,
Well, I
cannot
don't
see
know
you.
what happened there. I was actually trying to close off other tabs and make sure that we could see each other. Um, what about you guys in the crowd? Can you see us both, or do you only see one of us? Sometimes there's a little weirdness. You can see both. Okay, everybody else can see both, so
Okay.
we'll go with.
Okay. Yeah, we'll go with that. That's on my end. I'll get used to seeing a silhouette here, but that's okay. Um, so yeah, I lost my train of thought there.
Embracing the fullness of God and not letting it just be about minimizing sin, that there's more to it than just saying sin is evil or something we have to avoid.
Right. So sin is not just avoiding those things that we've classically said is on the do not do list. And so the lust and the pornography and the affairs, where sin is also failing to be who God has created us to be. So in some ways, shifting toward potential is saying, no, this is serious business, because if we fail to be who God has called us to be, in some ways we're being unfaithful. We are being unfaithful if we are not pressing toward who God has called us to be.
Yeah, wow, that's really good. And so if we can't figure out who it is that God has called us to be, we're definitely going to fail in that place of becoming who he's called us to be. So it sounds like we need a right mind even when we look at what scripture says about sexuality and who we're supposed to be. This is good stuff. Let me talk about this real quick. So Anthony writes in, this is plain in general sense, but what about men who have suffered abuse sexually? Is it a different ballgame? And that's such a good question, because that's a tough place for men when they've endured some kind of abuse, and then they have to try to figure out what does it look like to be healthy in a relationship.
It is different. It's a different ballgame. And so I think what the Christian community as a whole is doing well is being able to address a lot of those different things. And so we have recovery groups for addiction, for example. Languages coming online for men who have suffered abuse, where it's just not women who have suffered abuse. Men have suffered sexual abuse, and literature is coming online for that as well. And so as a whole, I believe we're doing a good job being able to name and address some of those things to help us get back to health. Where I want to enter the conversation is shifting it to, now that maybe the guy who has worked through the abuse and found some healing, the guy who has got some healing from addiction recovery, no longer in the fair, how do we now continue to help them grow into their sexual best?
Yeah.
Or for the guys who are on the verge, so that they don't go into sexual addiction, how do we help them to continue growing? And just general teaching for the church community as a whole, so that young men are growing up with a better vision for their sexuality, so that maybe we can start to minimize addiction, maybe we can start to minimize abuse, maybe we can start to minimize these things by casting that larger vision. And so this part of the conversation is focused more on the offense. How do we move the ball forward? But certainly there's need for continued conversation of how do we deal with the sexual abuse and the addictions and the affairs. All those are still very needed conversations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody has kind of their niche area. So there's some that are working kind of maybe down in the trenches, working on helping people get through the place of healing that they need to, where it looks like you're kind of right outside of that place. So as people are getting the healing, it's almost like putting them forward, kind of like the prodigal son back. You've come back, and now you're being embraced. And what is it now to move from you're being embraced, accepted by the Father, to live in fullness?
Yes. Welcome back. We will cry with you. We'll grieve with you. All that. Welcome back. And now it's time to be a faithful steward. Now it's time to be a true son of God and continue growing. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And the prodigal son is such a beautiful picture of that, because like we know that part of the story, right? He's embraced, he's given back everything, even though he should have lost it, and his father sees him and is excited about him. But kind of, we don't know what life looks like after that for him. So that's part of the work. You're saying, let's do this as men and figure out how do we figure out what it really looks like to walk in fullness and wholeness and be everything that God has called me to be.
And that switch, many guys, that very thing where slept around in college and now married, and sexuality just shut down. And so many men have made that, I have a wild past, and I don't want to bring, some of it well-intentioned, and that they don't want to bring what they would call that depravity or the dirtiness of sex into their marriage bed, where they honor their wives, respect their wives so much, they don't want to associate their wives with that sinful past. And I get that, and that's very respectful, to want to keep your marriage bed pure. But what that translates into for many guys is now back to playing it safe. They're burying their sexuality and not growing into its potential. They're not being assertive. They're not creating the sexual life that God has called them to be because of those pasts. And so again, it's not letting those past sins negate your responsibility today to continue growing.
Yeah. So in your work with men, when you're helping men get to that place of don't let the sexual past be something that's making it difficult for you to really move forward in your own marriage, what are some of the things you tell them to help them get to a place where they can make that shift and say, no, what we're doing is holy and righteous and good and pleasing? Like, how do you help them get to that place?
A lot of patience, where it takes time, because again, with some of that conditioning, I can tell them that. Go walk through of how it may harm the relationship with God, with others, with self. We can walk through all of that. But really what it boils down to is practicing. Okay, today, will you initiate with your wife? Will you plan a date night? Will you think outside the box as it relates to the sexuality? Will you now start changing the narrative? And so for each guy, it's going to be different what his narrative is, what that lie is. Maybe language a lot different for each guy, but it's a lot of patience in reworking how they think about sex and sexuality. And so, yeah, just depending on who the guy is, kind of what that language is, but helping to remind them that they are sons, that this is a gift to you to enjoy to the full. And how do we help to grow this up? And now what does that look like in this season of life? When you're going on your 5th anniversary with your wife, when you have kids in the house, what does it look like when you're talking to your kids about sex? What do you want them to know? And so in each of those life moments, moment by moment in the trenches, it's like, what does this look like? How do we now grow this up?
Yeah. So in other words, being able to tell your story, but also being able to change that story as you're growing and maturing and going through different stages.
Right, in real time. And so this is not something that can be done, all right, here's a lesson and here's the 5 points. And now at the end of this lesson, you have this perfected and can go do it. It's we have to be retrained. And part of that retraining is, again, like a coach, whether that's a voice coach or a track coach or whatever. It's just, all right, let's show up at the track and run another mile. All right, good job. Do it again, do a little faster. All right, watch your breathing. And so it's doing that sexually as well, where we just have to be retrained here. We're on all those levels, how we think, how we feel, how we behave, we need to be retrained. And so walking with other guys, walking with a coach to help you to retrain that.
Yeah, that's really good because people do have to tell their stories over and over again to get to the place where it can be a new story. Absolutely. So one of the other things that you put on this form that is really good is you said that the world desperately needs more men who reflect God's image well, sexual beings. Can you speak to that a little more?
Yeah. So when we look at the world, there's a lot of brokenness. There's a lot of things that are not as they should be. And so developing a godly sexuality, a sexuality in which we're moving to our potential, is not just for the marriage bed. And so for Christians, we're called to be salt and light in the world. And so when the world looks at us, what do they see? Do they see all of the depravity and brokenness that are in their lives? Now we're not being salt and light. And so when I say the world desperately needs men who live to the fullness of their sexuality, it's so that we can shine as lights in the world here. When people think about sexuality, often they don't think about Christians.
Yeah.
We're not deemed the sexy ones, and that's not how it should be. God created sex. Our God created this. We should be the sexy ones out there. People should, wow, what they have, we want more of that. How did you get that? Come, let me tell you about my God. Come, let me tell you about my Jesus. Let me tell you how I got to this point where my sexuality can shine. But what they see is, yeah, y'all are wrestling with the same things that we are. And so what has your faith done for you? Because y'all have the same heartaches and stress that everyone else has. And so this responsibility, again, is not just to have a better marriage and to have a happy sex life. Those are great benefits. But it's also part of the Great Commission. How do we go out into the world and let people see the good works that God has done in us?
Right, right. Which is what we need for that community change. So, like you said, we're supposed to be salt and light. So we're supposed to be changing lives all around us. And if we're not different from the world, there's no reason for the world to know Christ. So one of our greatest examples, our greatest ways to be a witness of that is absolutely to have stronger marriages, stronger relationships, but not just have them, actually tell people about them and help people understand how they can have them all.
Right. So again, I'm all for better marriages and better sex life. But again, how do we now be conformed to the image of Christ? How do we now move in that direction so that people, how'd you get that? Man, y'all seem to be having a good life and your sex life seems to be on point. How did you get there? Okay, come, let's talk. And to have a community where we can have those open conversations where we don't have to hide. We have a common mentor, Doug Rosenau. He talks about being sexual evangelist, where sexuality can be used to evangelize. Here's how to have a great sex life. But again, it's not so much about the sex life. It is, here's how good our God is.
Yeah.
That he's given us this gift. And wow, look how beautiful it is. Look how good it is. Look what it gets reflected of him. This is awesome. come enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. Gospel centered, it says Chris, you're right. That's exactly what it is. Gospel centered message here, making sure that we're sharing who God is and who God has called us to be. Um, I love when Doug says that about being sexual evangelist, and I'm really teaching people truth because the world is hurting and they need to know that you don't have to be broken. You don't have to live in this place of pain and torment. Like, we really can have life and have it more abundantly, just as God said, and that can be within our sexual relationships too. And the way we do that is becoming more and more Christ-like, because as you become more Christ-like, you treat others with respect and kindness and care and gentleness. But that doesn't mean that you just step back and play it safe either, because you can move forward and embrace and enjoy without being playing it safe. That's for sure.
Right. And so as we move toward Christ-likeness, now we can become more creative.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're not just going through the motions of life and our sexuality. God is a creative God.
Mm-hmm.
He's playful. And so now our sexuality becomes that play, that even with our gender, and so social sexuality outside of the bedroom, we can enjoy that interaction, that dance of the sexes, as it were, and be creative and enjoying that. We can be passionate. So we can have a passionate attitude as we approach life, where the attitude is not one of the slave, fear, or one of the orphan, shame, but one as true son, where there's joy, there's freedom, there's passion. We get to have that in our sexuality. We also get to be generous, where it's not, okay, I got to hoard this it's like, no, freely I was given this and freely I'm going to give, which doesn't mean we get to sleep around. I'm not saying be generous in that sense. But generous in our presence. So being able to offer for men our masculine presence to the world around us, which can do wonders. And so for our sisters in Christ, for our daughters in Christ, for our mothers in Christ, offering our masculine presence can do wonders and offer a blessing to them. But, I don't know what she's going to think. If I give her a hug, I may send the wrong message. And so now we don't hug each other. We don't offer that blessing because of that fear. But getting to that point where, I can hug you. I can sit and talk with you again, like Christ with the woman I can pour into you, and it's all from a position of purity, all from a position of righteousness, where there's no hint of sin there.
Right.
Again, we have to grow into that. And so depending on where you're at in your story, it may not be wise to do certain aspects of this. But what I'm trying to do is to cast that vision. But the vision is larger than don't act out, don't sin. Good start. And if that's where you're at in your journey, stay there. And so you may still need to bounce your eyes. If that's where you're at, then fine. But know that the vision is larger than that to grow into.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned our friend and mentor, Doug Rosenau. For those of you who haven't read his book, Soul Virgins, that's a really great read. And it talks a little bit about what Corey's talking here with social sexuality and just being able to enjoy one another as opposite genders. So here we are. We're on a webinar, both of us talking about sex, and we can do that because we can keep it pure and holy, and it doesn't have to be anything dirty or tainted, but we can talk about the fun of sex. Both of us married. I think I saw that your wife is on here checking you out, so that's cool. Yep.
Thanks, sweetie.
My husband isn't. He's in class still right now. But we can have this opportunity to talk about this, and it can be safe and it can be holy. And we need so much more of that in church. Oh, she said hi. We need so much more of that in church or in the world, where we can talk to one another and we can honor one another as male and female, with it just being that. And it provides such a safety to know that we can do that. One of the things to me that has just been really cool is when I've been in some kind of relationship or conversation with a man, and I can enjoy his protective nature, and I can enjoy the way that he talks and the way he carries himself, but that's all it is. Like, there's nothing sexual about it. It's fun to have those conversations together. And sin tries to destroy that, because it tries to make us become a slave or orphan, like you've talked about, instead of enjoying the fullness of God's creation, which does include male and female.
Right. And so same on the masculine side, being in the feminine presence, where there's that beauty, that ability to be comforted, nurtured, and affirmed in a way that when a woman affirms me, it's different than when a guy's affirm me. I need both, but it's a different type of affirmation. And so when a woman said, thank you for doing that, man, you're strong. It's like, okay, now I'm swelled up. I'm ready to fight another day. Again, when my guys do that, is good and needed and fills me up in a different way. But yeah, we need that dance of the sexes.
Yeah, and it's the same way for women. Women, we like to compliment each other and, say when you look pretty, and it feels nice when another girl says, "Oh, you look pretty today." But to hear a man say it, and it doesn't have to be sexual, to hear a man say,
Right.
"Oh, you look really nice today," it's just different. It makes you
Right.
feel more beautiful and I don't know, pretty. We like to be pretty. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're right. Like we really need that from one another. We need to know that it's safe and to be able to, and that's part of that fullness that you're talking about of sexuality, where sex has its boundaries within marriage, how it's supposed to be. But there's also this entire different area that we often forget about, that social sexuality, where we are sexual beings, and you're not just a sexual being when you're having sex.
Right. Right. But that's back to changing the narrative. So being able to think, elevate the conversation beyond just our genitals, beyond just sex, where it's now about who we are. So that's what will help men to discover as well. When we're talking about moving towards your sexual potential, this is not just about in the bedroom. This is about who you are as a man. So how do you reflect God's image as a man? And what does that mean? How do you now offer your strength into the world around you? Not only to your wife, to your kids, but also to your friends, your coworkers, the stranger on the street. How do you offer that reflection of God's strength to the world around you? And so when I talk about developing a healthy sexuality or developing our sexual potential for men, it is about this bigger picture, this larger box that we're talking about, much more than simply how do you be more sort of in the bedroom. Important conversation, but a larger conversation is also needed.
Right, absolutely. We have in the chat, Anthony says, so he's found that when spirituality and sexuality are not in sync, then there's an unbalance in marriage. And so whichever one is fuller, that's what the partner is going to give themselves over to. So either all spiritual, which would be that maintain, play it safe, or all sexual, which would be more that slave piece. Yeah, I think you're right. That's part of why we have to find this balance. Our buddy Doug calls that 3D personality. So getting to that place where we realize we're emotional beings and we're spiritual beings and we're sexual beings, and all of those things come together to make us this one whole being.
And I think, right, we tend to get out of sync there, where we focus one on the other. We live in a culture that focuses more on the physical aspect of it. And then sometimes in the church community, we focus more on the spiritual aspect of it, where we need all three. Yes, we're physical beings, but being a godly, in this context, conversation, being a sexual man doesn't deny our physicality, doesn't deny that we're embodied beings as well. It doesn't deny our emotions. We can also have that spiritual center, where spiritual enlightenment is not denying that we're embodied beings. We can be spiritually grounded and embodied and sexual and erotic. Those are not mutually exclusive. Those can be very compatible with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Who's this Doug you've mentioned? Well, I will type his information here into the box. His name's Doug Rosenell. He's a doctor. He's a therapist. And so he is the one that trained both Corey and myself. So he's a sex therapist as well. Really a forerunner. I'm going to just type in one of his books. You can look this up online, and then you're going to find some others. But he has one called Celebration of Sex, which is one of his probably more popular books, I would say. It's a nice thick book that just has a ton of information in it. Everything from the biblical talk that we're talking about, putting sex in its right place, celebrating it, but not making ourselves only care about sex. And then also getting to the place where he helps you work through any, difficulties and things that are common in marriages. So check out Celebration of Sex. Has a guidebook that you can use too. That's just fantastic. And then he's got other resources as well, but that would be kind of the main one. You'll find others when you look at that one. Guys, we only have about 12 minutes left, so this is your chance to ask questions if you have them. And if we don't see them or chats, then Corey and I are going to keep going and having this conversation. So one of the things that you had said when I was asking questions is you're wanting to talk about how our sexuality is a reflection of God's divine image, and that it can be used to bring more life, goodness, and love to others. And we've already been talking about that a lot, but we haven't talked a whole lot about that piece of how we actually reflect God's divine image in our sexuality. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. And so when we think about the purpose of, as we're talking about, this is more than just sex, sexuality. What is the purpose of sexuality? And so in Genesis 1, God said, let us create man in our own image. And so in the image of God, he created them male and female. And so when we think about the purpose of our sexuality, it is to reflect who God is. And so we're males and females, we're sexual beings to reflect who God is. Let's create man in our image. So he created them male and female. And so our sexuality is God reflective. So when it comes to men, kind of like we were saying a moment or two ago, how do now men reflect the image of God? Females reflect the image of God as well. I would say men reflect the image of God in strength, and females get to reflect the image of God in beauty. And so again, this is not just physical strength or physical beauty, but more essence. And so as men, we get to come through on behalf of others. And so how do we see God using his strength? We see God using his strength to protect, to guide, to provide for his people, to come through on our behalf. To break through walls, barriers, and hardships, and to give us life and life to the full. And so part of how we do that as men is doing that same thing, to protect, to provide, to guide those in our community and our family, our children into a better life. And so part of, again, being a sexual man is not just the bedroom, it is how do we help provide, offer our strength to bring life and goodness to others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you use the word essence. So I have a husband who is very strong, loves the gym, bench presses some crazy amount. But strength isn't just in his physical body, it's there. But
Right.
some of the times when I feel that he is the biggest strength to me is, when I send him a quick text, babe, I'm having a rough day, blah, blah, blah. And he writes back something that tells me he's here for me and he loves me and he's comforting me. And so strength is more that essence. And I mean, I'm sure the same is true of beauty, that it doesn't matter this physical outward appearance. It's so much deeper, that kind of that spiritual self that comes out.
Right, where it's not denying the physical on both sides, where there's still a physical beauty and still a physical strength. And so physically, men tend to have more muscle mass than most women. Again, bell curve and all that. But in general, men tend to have more muscle mass. And so there's a physical component there. But yes, it goes deeper than the physical. It is essence. And so like your husband sending you that text, that's part of offering that emotional strength, where I'm here for you. I can be like God, that rock, that strong tower. And so when your emotions are that storm, I get to offer that strength and be that rock for you. And that's part of how I reflect God's image as a man. Some of it may be praying for you, offering that spiritual covering of protection. Those are other ways in which we offer our masculinity, our sexuality, that again has nothing directly to do with sex per se, but still part of our masculine essence.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. I love it. So we've only got a few minutes left here. And one of the things that I like to try to do is just give people almost a challenge. Actually, I want to read something else that you wrote on here just because it's a really great conversation. But you were saying that it's important that men are to become the men and true sons of God who are able to manage their sexuality well. So free from worry about what others think, filled with joy and gratitude, and able to live with ease throughout the day. So I just want to share that because you had put that that's one of the bigger hopes that you have for men in general, that they can get to that place where that's the life they live. Here in the last few minutes, what I always like to do is try to give a challenge or an encouragement to the crowd. And I'll let you think of one for a second, so I'm not putting you in the hot seat too much.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome. But I did that to someone by accident. I didn't mean to, but I was like, and go. And so I'm trying to get better about that. But I'm going to give just a quick challenge to everybody listening in, and then I'll let you do the same thing, just kind of as our wrap up here and what we're talking about. But I would tell you, for those that are listening in, I would say I would encourage you to really embrace what does it look like to have a vision of sexuality, the way that God calls us to live. So not just in that place of what the world says or living as slave or orphan, but what does it really look to get to that place of calling yourself a son? And then for the men that are listening, I would encourage you to share this with the woman in your life, because this is a good message that women need to hear as well. I think sometimes we just don't fully and completely understand what our men are going through, because we don't live in that world. And so we try our best to get it, but there are just times we don't. So share this information with the females in your life. And then women, if you're listening in, I would encourage you to share this with the man in your life as well, so that he can hear the encouragement that he needs, and in a place that's full of grace also, not pushing or saying, sin, sin, sin. So I encourage you guys to share this with people that would benefit from it. So off to you, Corey. What are some things you would say that would be just a good challenge or encouragement today?
My challenge, and this is going to be directed more toward the men. Well, let me start with the wives. And so, wives, if you're listening, share this with your husbands, so that they can have. A lot of times when we talk about male sexuality, it is more we treat men like children. We patronize them and tell them all the things that they need to do to be good Christian boys. And so share this with them, hopefully as a way to encourage that there's more to your sexuality. For the men, the encouragement is stop playing it safe. I understand that you may have a sexual past. There's a lot of uncertainty. You may not have a clear vision of what sexuality can be, but there's more to your sexuality than what you have often believed. There's greater depth. There's greater goodness. There's greater beauty there. So stop playing it safe. Stop staying on the surface and be willing to work it out. Work out that goodness. Work out that truth. Work out that beauty so that you can be, as we've said earlier, those true sons of God, who's able to live at ease in the world, who's able to experience a sexuality that has joy and gratitude, who doesn't have to worry about measuring up either to wives or to other men or to pornography or romantic knowledge. You don't have to worry about any of that because you can be the true sons of God and rest in who God has created you to be. And so my encouragement to you, again, is to stop playing it safe and discover the more and to live passionately.
Yeah, that's good. I love it. Corey, if people are looking to find you, how do they get to where they're following what you're doing and getting just more wisdom from you?
Yeah, they can find me online at www.coreycarlisle.org and social media at Dr. Corey Carlisle.
.org, not .com. So that's the website. And then social media, I think I know you're on Facebook, right?
Twitter? Facebook and Twitter are my two main ones. So the handles there are just Dr. Corey Carlisle.
Okay. And I'm going to put this on there for you guys so y'all have that. Dr. Corey Carlisle. Is that spelled right? Carlisle. Good.
That's good. Beautiful.
Awesome. Awesome. Corey, thank you so much for being a part of this. When I close this webinar down, it shuts you out as well. So thank you so much for being a part of this. It's been a long time since we did a webinar together.
It has been a while. It has been a while. It has been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think the last time we did one, you hadn't gotten your doctorate yet. And
that sounds right. Yeah.
You're certified either. So it's been a number of years.
Yeah. So yeah, that has been a couple of years because I think I got my certification 2015, somewhere back in there, 2013, 2015. I finished my doctorate in 2015. So yeah, it's been a couple of years.
It's been a while. That's also our survivors, also doctorates. I'm not sure what you mean, Anthony. Our survivors also doctorates. We each went to school to get our doctorate degree. I'm very open about it on my site. I am a survivor of sexual abuse, so I don't hide that on my blog. You can read about that. So there's nothing in this world that can impact you so much that you can't push forward and be all that God has called you to be. And that's simply because God is a healer, not for any other reason, but because he's good and he heals and he wants us to walk in that victory. And so I believe we can seek that out and receive it.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, blessings to you guys. Thanks so much for being a part of this. Hey, share this with a friend. This is important information. We want to make sure that it's getting out there and going to others. So God bless you. Thank you again, Corey. I look forward to doing more of this in the future.
Definitely. Blessings.
All right. Bless you guys.